have a feeling these were from the other.
Like those. Yeah. We just never left. We were in the group. Oh, okay. You want that turned on or no? You can try it.
There you go.
I think I'll talking, yeah.
Good morning. Because it was behind the seat of the car.
That's okay.
That's basically what they have assumed like that. It didn't damage the screen.
And feather drop on it.
We did. I placed. I put the face down like this and put the tracking back out. I'll try to send it back out. Anyway, but
No, I'm good.
Oh, wait. Burn off the grass yesterday. Oh. 22 acres worth.
The bowl was windy.
It was windy yesterday. Very windy.
That's one of the rules.
We had about 2 acres around the side already cut. So. There's a creek on one side. There's the rest of it goes. I went and got a control burn. We were trying to make it control.
No, the wind we had yesterday.
Yeah, no. We'll do that.
Bad. It's bad to the driver's side. And the other side, I did not like me right. And I was like, what? Hey, I don't know what you're doing. Are you doing? Are you driving? Yeah. I know.
well, good morning, everybody. It's about a little after 10, so we need to get started. I am not John or John. John Jameson woke up this morning with a temperature, and he's sick at home. And John Sly's not back from his trip to the lectures, so he's working his way back yet. So here I am. So I'm going to plead for your patience and consideration, and hopefully a lot of communication in the class today. Before we get started, Dan, could you lead us in a word of opening prayer?
Let's pray. Holy God, Father in heaven, Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity we have to come together here in this place and to study your word. We ask, Father, that you would be with each one of us. Help us to discern in a proper way your will to draw closer to you. Be with us, Father, and forgive us where we fail in Christ's most holy name.
Amen. Okay, remember the last time we finished class, John the Jameson was showing us that video of the battle at Thermopylae. And that was a decisive battle as far as the future of the Persian Empire was concerned, because you remember the Persian Empire covered everything from India all the way through the Mesopotamian area down into northern Africa and all the way over almost to Greece. And in the Battle of Thermopylae, Persia actually won that particular battle, but Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, it's a lot easier to say, so I'm going to say Xerxes, left his whole navy in Greece, and his navy got defeated. So he went home with his tail between his legs, so to speak, and that's kind of where we pick up the story, starting in chapter 3. Fortunately, John sent me all of his PowerPoints. Unfortunately, they're set up in such a way that I can't project them. So here they are.
I could hold them up for you.
Well, I thought about standing like this, because I used to use overheads a lot. But anyway, so let's start reading in chapter 3. Who wants to start reading in chapter 3, verses 1 through 6?
I can.
Okay.
After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened, when they spoke to him daily and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai.
Okay, thanks, John. All right, so we have here the king, Xerxes, promoted Haman, who was an Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. Why would he have done that? Who was Haman? We haven't even seen mention of him up until this point. So who was Haman? Pardon me?
Haman for the king.
Okay. And he was also, as we see later on, a real close drinking buddy of the king. These two got together and had a few frequently, apparently. So he advanced him above all the princes who were in the whole country. So he was basically second in command. Okay. And what were they, what was it that they were commanded to do by the king? What kind of treatment was Haman supposed to receive from his servants and from the people?
They were to bow and give him homage.
Okay, bow and give him homage. Almost as it's implied in one of the footnotes in the material that he was to be almost treated like a god. And we know that the Persian kings were also similarly treated that way. They were considered themselves as gods, and the people wanted to consider them as gods. So they're going along through their day, and Haman's making his way through town, and there's Mordecai. And what's he do? He doesn't bow down. That's right. He doesn't. And it didn't just happen once. It happened frequently. And how does Haman react? Not good. Yeah, I mean, he was livid, hated it. And the servants were asking Haman why, or not asking Haman, were asking Mordecai, why aren't you bowing down? Why aren't you following the king's command? What was his response?
I'm a Jew.
I'm a Jew.
He did what he told Esther not to do. He let him know he was a Jew.
He let him know he was a Jew. But what's that got to do with it? So he's a Jew. Why doesn't he bow down?
It goes back to their ancestral enemies. He was on the side of Esau. Haman was, and came through the Agag, and then Saul was a descendant, or Mordecai was a descendant of Saul, was Jewish.
All right.
So I think they were along down to the ancestral line. They were enemies.
They had some family history.
They had some family history, and I think they both knew about it.
Yeah, there's a strong indication that's exactly what the problem was. In addition to that, it kind of reminds you a little bit of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What did they refuse to do?
They refused to go with Ezra, the king of Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay, and they refused to bow down also because it's in the law of Moses. You're not supposed to treat anybody. You're not supposed to create any other gods before me. You're not supposed to treat any other as gods before me. So there's a lot of things going on in these dynamics right here. Okay.
You've also got two words there. You've got bow down and pay homage.
And pay homage, right.
I think you'll find that the Israelites sometimes would bow down before a king, just showing respect. And I don't think there was anything wrong with that even under the law of Moses.
Right. But
that pay homage is the Hebrew word for worship. So it's to worship is what's the problem here. And as a Jew, there was only one God.
That's right.
There's only one that they could worship.
Okay. So we got that. We got the family history of the history of the peoples. So okay.
Hey, Mike, real quick on this. I think this is fascinating that Mordecai does come out and say he's a Jew. He doesn't pay homage. He doesn't bow down. And yet, you think because of the context of Esther that God is not mentioned because of, the culture at that time. Again, like you said, the king was supposed to be like a god, so there could be a clash. Mm-hmm. But here, he's saying, I'm a Jew because of my religion and because I believe in God, I'm not going to treat you like a god. It's interesting that the rest of the book, or the whole book of Esther, doesn't mention God. You would think because of how bold he is here that there would be, and still there's not a mention in here of God. I just find it fascinating that Mordecai is blatant about it, and then the author still omits God.
Yeah, and we don't know why that is, but the implication is clearly there throughout the whole book, and God's providence is there throughout the whole book as we'll continue to see in various places. So, okay.
somebody just willing to stand alone. Because evidently he was the only one, because he stood out.
Yeah,
And there were other Jews, no doubt, scattered all through the citadel, Shushan, and
well, there very definitely were.
yeah. But they evidently went ahead and bowed down and paid homage.
Yeah.
But Mordecai stood alone.
And there's a lesson there for us as far as standing up for our principles and not compromising, even if everybody else, all of our peers, if we were someplace and they said everybody's got to bow down to Trump or Putin or whoever, and everybody does it, and except you, you got to stand up for your principles, even if every other Christian around you doesn't. We have to stand up for our principles. We have to be the people that God wants us to be at all times.
Kind of blows that situational ethics out of the water, doesn't it? Yeah, because he's going to obey God. He's going to have a rope put around his neck, and he's going to be strung up.
That's right.
And not only that, everybody else is going to be killed.
He's endangering his whole people because he's obeying God. That's right. There's another hand or something. Carry.
I was just thinking of a modern day example. I don't know, you may have seen this picture of the Nazis, and there's a big, huge crowd. Everybody's doing the Heil Hitler, and there's one man like standing there that's not doing it. Like, I always thought of that when I think of this example. I think of that modern day example, that one person among thousands of people standing there refusing the Heil Hitler salute.
Or you remember that one guy in Tiananmen Square who was standing in front of that tank, and he's the only one in sight, and he's standing in front of it. Yep. Okay, any other comments before we move on? Y'all are doing great. Okay, who wants to read verses 7 through 11, please?
I will. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pure, that is, they cast lots before Haman day after day. And they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you.
Okay. So in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, what year would that be? How far along in the process of this story have we come?
5 years.
Okay, 5 more years. Okay, and that is the Persian word for a lot, casting lots. And Haman cast lots, and he continued to cast lots and cast lots, trying to establish and determine a date to bring about his plot against the Jews. And it fell into the month of Adar. Okay. Nisan is the first month, and that's kind of in the vicinity of March or April. Adar is the Jewish 12th month, so that's going to be in the vicinity of March, roughly. So That's a 12-month period of time. That's a good way out. You think there's any providence by God in that? That there's 12 months before he can pull off his plot? What does that do? It says in here that they published, well, we'll get into that later, but we set that time, and then Haman went to King Xerxes, and how did he present the situation? What did he say about it?
They're a threat to you, basically.
Yeah, and why were they a threat?
There weren't no bad laws.
They weren't obeying the laws. Well, who wasn't obeying the laws? According to, Mordecai appears to be the only one, but he had, as a result of his behavior, as we said a few minutes ago, he had now endangered all of the Jews.
And Mike, just real quick, going back to the timing too, in God's providence, it didn't affect the Passover that they were going to celebrate. You know, nothing was going to happen until much later. So while it started, you know, theoretically before Passover,
right,
it didn't interrupt or bother or stop the Passover.
Good point.
Just another thing.
And significantly, what does the Passover represent? Deliverance from Egypt, deliverance from bondage and slavery, and potentially death. So, okay, that's a good point. Thank you, Joe. So, yes, wife.
I just thought Haman is Mr. Clever, because he doesn't go and tell the king, hey, he won't bow down to me. He says, oh, this is against you. They're not doing that. And I just think he's using and playing that role, that it isn't about me that I want these people. It's to your benefit to get rid of these people. And he must have had a lot of money, because you're going to see there, he was going to put into the king's treasury all this money.
Yeah. So. And what had just happened? He had just come back from this losing battle. He was pretty much humiliated. And now Haman's bringing him another situation where these people were disrespecting him, in Haman's words. So that was further humiliation on his part. And so he was all for taking care of these people and getting rid of some more potential humiliation towards him as a king. Okay?
Mike, it shows how spiteful and hateful he is as his character. Because when one man offends him on what his actions, that he wants to take out the whole group of people.
Right.
And that tells a lot about how. And it also shows, how powerful one person can be, either towards good or bad. And,
that's right.
And can manipulate even the leadership to the point of it can be pretty devastating.
That's right. Pick up on her point, Haman being clever. It reads here like she's saying this won't even come back to the king. He's going to hire mercenaries. It's not going to be like the royal army doing it.
Right.
It's going to be like, so officially his hands are clean.
Right. Good point. Good point.
One thing I always wondered is why Haman was willing to wait a year. But it took a process.
Well, it took the process of casting these lots, and God's hand was in that. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't something that they didn't have a chance to work through a process, get the communication back. As we'll see, it communicates through the whole country, far and wide, through the whole Persian world, and back to Esther, and then we'll see what happens there. So we already mentioned the 10,000 talents. Anybody happen to look up how much that's worth?
saying that it comes out to 375 tons, and that in today's money, it would be $55 million.
Okay, 55 million is one. I looked up another source, and it came out to a little over 19 million. So 19 million, 55 million, you know, buck here, buck there, you know. What kind of message would that be to somebody who just lost a huge navy in a big war? Yeah. It's pretty good, right? And so, what was the king's response to Haman when he offered this big chunk of money in order for this proclamation, this edict, to be sent out? What did the king say? He said, the money's yours to do with whatever you want. He didn't just grab it. He said, you can do whatever, it's your money. Do whatever you want to with it. But the people are yours too. You can do whatever you want to them as well.
Didn't say what kind of business Haman was in, does it?
It was probably shady, whatever it was.
Oil business or something.
What? Yes. Yes.
So reminiscent of politics today.
Yes. Yes, it is.
And I had a note too that they said maybe he was planning on, since he was going to destroy all of the Jews, he was going to be confiscating their wealth, and maybe that's where some of it was.
Well, and that's mentioned here further down in the next section we're going to read. Yeah. Somebody read 12 to 15 for us, please. Cindy, since you brought that up, would you do that?
12 to 15. Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out in the script of each province and in the language of each people all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various people. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and little children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality so that they would be ready for that day.
Okay. And so go ahead and read 15 as well.
Spurred on by the king's command, the couriers went out, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered.
Okay. So these letters were sent out over the king's name. The king had given Haman his signet ring to seal, which gave him basically the authority of the king to do whatever he wanted to do. And so this went out, and it went out in every language of every province in the whole of the Persian Empire. And we already saw how far that went. It's still, with the exception of Greece, it still covered the known world pretty much at that time. So it went out in every language. So not only did the people understand and read it, all of the Jews who were in the provinces got that word too, that they were going to be not just killed. The decree said they would destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews. I mean, Haman wanted to make sure that they got the clear message that they were to be absolutely and utterly destroyed. Nothing left. No women, children, men, young and old, everybody. And, as Cindy said earlier, and to seize their possessions as plunder. So there wasn't going to be any evidence of the Jews anywhere in Persia anymore. There wasn't going to be anything left. And it says the couriers went out, impelled by the king's command, while the decree was issued in the city of Susa, which is the summer capital, kind of. There was Susa was the main capital, and there was another city, Babylon was the other capital that they used seasonally. And what did they do? What did the king and Haman do while this decree had gone out? What did drink? These two drinking buddies again. They just sat back and were living the high life and getting drunk up, liquored up while the capital was in complete confusion. It said nobody understood what was going on or why, but everybody was in absolute chaos. Any comments or thoughts on any of that? Yes.
I wonder if the people, the Israelites were never known to be a disruptive people, were they? They were always good, hard workers. I think of Daniel and different things.
They weren't known to be destructive. I'll blow you up. They weren't known to be destructive while they were in captivity. They got a little rowdy with the Maccabees and some of the other folks later on. The ones that had come back were, but no, they weren't disruptive or anything while they were in captivity.
But in prior to captivity, they were in charge. So.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's kind of, as far as the other people, kind of made an impression.
Correct. That's right. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I was just thinking they were good people, productive. Obviously, they had benefited. If they were going to plunder them and take all their money and stuff, they had done well. And, and God even said they were going to prosper in that land. Even though they were taken into captivity, they were going to prosper and build houses.
Build houses and plant crops and all that.
So I bet they wondered, why are we killing these people? They're not really, they're not bowing down, but are they really doing anything wrong?
Right. Which explains why the whole city was in confusion.
Yes.
It's also appealing to the base nature of people. I can come kill you and take your stuff, and it's legal.
Yeah, right. That's a good point.
That was Hitler's stance too, I think.
Mm-hmm. He did it. He did exactly that with the Jews. They're still finding artwork and things that the Nazis had squirreled away places. So, okay. All right. Let's move on to chapter 4. Can somebody read just the first 3 verses there?
I'll get it. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out in the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting. And many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes.
Okay, so the Jews, like we said, this decree went out in all of the local languages, so everybody understood it, and all the Jews were reacting, mournfully. They were weeping, clothes torn, sackcloth and ashes, all of it. And then, let's see, verses 4 through 8. I'll read 4 through 8 here. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So Esther, she hadn't heard about the decree. All she knew was her people were terrified and mourning and fasting and weeping, but she apparently didn't know why. And so she sent out one of the king's eunuchs to Mordecai to find out what was going on. And so Hathach went out to Mordecai in verse 6 to the city square in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict, which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go into the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. Excuse me. So Mordecai was giving her all the information that had been sent out without her knowing about it, even to the extent of the amount of money that was going to be paid for their heads. And Mordecai was pleading with her to go to the king and basically reveal who he was, who her people were, and who she was. Up to this point, did the king know she was a Jew? Okay. Up to right before this, it didn't seem like anybody really knew Mordecai was a Jew, did they? I mean, he revealed it as the reason why he wasn't bowing down to Haman. Not really clear whether or not they knew he was a Jew before that or not. Not really clear exactly when or if anybody knew that he was in any way related to Esther. I don't think. It doesn't appear clear to me. What do you think?
Because he had told her time and time again not to reveal it, again, in fear of her safety, but then he does it, I ain't going to say rather quickly, but there doesn't appear to be long hesitation to him, confessing that he is. So that's interesting that he shows that separation, I think, still in trying to disclose, she is.
So she's in a position where he can't go to the king. He's still in sackcloth and ashes. Nobody can enter into the king's gate wearing sackcloth. He's not about to make himself comfortable again just to be able to go in, even if he could go in. So he's appealing to Esther. And all this communication isn't really face to face between Esther and Mordecai, is it? Who's the go-between? The eunuch, Hathach, whatever. Did you have a comment?
Do you think him not wanting Esther to reveal that she was a Jew might kind of been an indication that there were some anti-Jewish feelings already bubbling up in the kingdom?
It could be. They knew there were some within the palace because of Haman and his influence, probably. I think it's likely.
When they were in Egypt, yeah. Everything was great when Joseph was around, but now the kings arose that didn't know Joseph. Well, everything was great when Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego were around, but does this king know anything about them?
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. Any other thoughts before we move on?
All these Jews were in exile, weren't they? They just chose not to leave Persia.
These are the ones that chose not to go back. Right.
But the ones that went back to Israel, these could have gone back to Jerusalem if they so desired, right?
Yes.
They elected to stay there in Persia under the Persian influence.
That's right.
Yep.
Which indicated that their situation wasn't so bad that they didn't want to give everything they had up to go back to a really an unknown circumstance that they might have to really work a lot harder and not be in a good situation.
But as far as the decree, it went over all of Persia, which included Judah. That was the other side of the city, of the river, rather.
The other side of the river, but still part of covered them as well.
Yep.
That's right. That's a good point. That's a very good point. Didn't think about that.
Wait a minute, it would have covered the ones that went back to Jerusalem?
Well, it went out in every province
Yeah.
of the Persian kingdom, and Judea was part of the Persian kingdom at that point. So yeah, it would have. That's a good point, Dan. Okay.
You know, I guess that's obvious, but I hadn't thought about it. So maybe this was God's providence to get his people to go back to where they should have gone, because these people were choosing to stay where maybe they really shouldn't have been staying. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. And I think that's part of the reason, my own summation, that's why God's not mentioned by the author, because they elected not to go back to Jerusalem, the ones that stayed in the Persian Empire. That's just supposition.
Well, one man's supposition is as good as another. Okay. All right. So, can somebody read 9 through 12, please?
I'll read it. Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king, to the inner court, who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. They related Esther's words to Mordecai.
Okay. So what's the rule of law in the king's palace? Who can come to him?
Only the ones that have been summoned.
Okay. Only the ones who've been summoned, and if he didn't hold out his scepter to them as they're coming in the door, if he didn't like point at them with his scepter, what happened? They're cut off. They're dead. And how long had it been since Esther had been summoned by the king?
13 days.
30 days. 30 days. So she'd been without contact to Xerxes for actually quite a while. And as far as he was concerned, she didn't really have any reason to come before him. So she was kind of in a continuous situation right there. And so Esther made that known to Mordecai. And then I'll read 13 and following. Then Mordecai told them, the eunuch, to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you and the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. So Mordecai really lays it on Esther, doesn't he? You really,
It's your chance.
this is your chance. This is your opportunity. And who knows whether or not, even though it's not stated as such, who knows it hasn't been God's providence all along to put you in this position. Because don't think just because you're the queen and you're sitting in a palace that you're going to be saved any more than any of the rest of the Jews. You're a Jew. You got an obligation here. You're one of God's people, and you have an opportunity to do something. You have an opportunity to save yourself and God's people. What are you going to do about it? So last couple verses there, what does she say? Who wants to read the end of chapter 15 through 17?
Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai sent his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him.
Okay.
And it tells a lot about Esther and her character, because she could have said, "Well, it's your fault for not bowing down, so you're causing all this stuff." But she doesn't. She says, "You're right," and fast and pray for it, and then
says if I die, I die.
If I die, so be it.
I'm going to do whatever I can as best I can, and if I die, I die. Mordecai basically gives God the glory. Says, if you don't do it, the Jews will be saved in another way. Somebody else will arise and take up our cause and save us. If it's not you, but you are in a position to do something, and you need to do it. Okay. Any other questions or comments? We're just about out of time. Okay. Thank you for your participation. Really. Thank you for your participation. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, good job.
Thank you.
Absolutely appreciate it. Great job.
Yeah. Love that. Okay. I know, that'd be a busy day. Yeah, it is. Are y'all looking? Okay, yeah. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Get that. Are y'all looking at your house? Yeah, we're going to some friends. We good. We just had a miracle. I lost this thing. It was in here.
Well, that's great. That's good.
I looked at that thing and I said, I could see him. Well, no.
Well, that's fantastic.
Opened it up and there it was. I had already lost one and another thing.
Oh, no.
So they're going to think I'm crazy. And I think it is.
Well, don't lose this one.
Well, I try not to. If that's all I use it, because I don't get out. He takes us to the grocery store and spend more at the grocery store than anybody out there.